Hello, beautiful. I had intended to make this video a little bit earlier. Actually, I'm not sure how true that is. I think it's true. I thought of making this video earlier, and it kind of got a little late on me, so I may look a little tired, but I do not think this will be very long because that's kind of part of the plan for what I had thought of earlier. I kind of would like to go through in short snippets the Bible, the story of the Bible. So anyway, I may try a few of those, see how it goes, and just limit myself to the narrative portions. I mean, not enforce it rigorously, but kind of intend to just tell the story, go through the parts that are more engaging rather than literally every single part. More engaging in the beginning, or sort of on their own. I think the whole Bible is engaging, but it is I sort of mean that in a certain way. It's, yeah. Anyway, so this short video is about the question you asked regarding the rod or staff. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but that turns into a snake in the Bible. I guess you asked that because it's kind of maybe odd. I do not know if it was odd because it sort of seems like magic, or if it was odd because things are turning into a snake. I don't know. I'm not sure why that stuck in your head. That's very interesting to me because I mean, I knew what you were talking about, so I recognized the story, but I do not think I had paid much attention to it. I mean, I knew it was there and it's a part of the story, but had just not stopped to think about it, just read it as part of the story. But it was actually really interesting as I thought about it, because you picked a very fascinating, intriguing part of the overall story. So the Bible is, it's I see it, well, it is clearly to me, one long continuous narrative, or I guess discontinuous, because there are other genres in there, and so there are little other parts in between the kind of narrative proper of the Bible, but the entire Bible put together tells one coherent story, presents a coherent message throughout, from beginning to end, and it begins in a certain way, and it has an ending that matches the beginning. It's like a novel, like a perfect novel or something. I think it really is. The old movie, was it called The Greatest Story Ever Told? That might have been specifically about Jesus, wasn't maybe the whole Bible. Yeah. But anyway, I think that's exactly what it is. It's an amazing story. So, jumping into the middle like this has its limitations, but I find it an interesting way to begin, and then probably, if this works out, I'll try it. I think I'll try it just for fun, just to teach myself, and if you have any interest, wonderful. If you do not, I will learn some things going through it, I'm sure. So just going to look at a short section. The section you asked about is, I mean, you can break it up, keep making it bigger and bigger to get the whole context, but it is as short as probably 5 verses. It is Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to 5. So that's probably about the minimum length to tell a sort of short story or short little vignette. But then you can extend that out to the end of that complete paragraph, and then probably a couple of paragraphs to get sort of a full sort of that scene, or at least that continuous camera shot of the scene or something like that. And then, of course, you can extend to the chapter, and even I'd say 2 chapters in there to give it some meaning in Exodus. Chapters 3 and 4 go together completely, and then of course how does Exodus, and then of course overall Exodus, it's the beginning of Exodus or close to the beginning, and then how does that fit into the whole Bible? How does it follow after Genesis? What's going on with the whole thing? So anyway, you can keep going, and if I go through the story after this video, it will not be too long before getting to this, because it is in Exodus, which is the second book of the Bible. There are 66 books, and this is the second one, and it's in chapter 3 of the second book, so it's pretty close to the beginning, though Genesis is a long book. But I found it interesting because there are really, in some real sense, if you think of the overall narrative of the Bible, I found it interesting that you picked this particular story or this particular section of the Bible, this particular, beginning of Exodus, and even this actual story. No, I was clear. No, that was true. This actual story within Exodus, because you can kind of divide the Bible up into four sections. I mean, you can make a model. You can divide it up as much as you want. But there are four very obvious sort of overarching sections of the narratives. You might divide it into, call it parts or something, part 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is the beginning of the second part, or toward the beginning, because it's chapter 3. The beginning starts at Exodus 1, let's say. But really, chapter 3 is exactly, in fact, the story that you mentioned is in some ways the real beginning of that part 3. So the four parts are, I won't go through them now, but the very first part in the Bible starts with, let's say, if you're thinking in terms of human characters, of course God is throughout, but is kind of the first group. The first part is kind of based on Adam, and then the second part is based on Abraham, and then the third part is Moses, and then the fourth part is Jesus. So, but parts 1 and 2, Adam and Abraham, both of those are completely contained within Genesis. So there are a lot of relatively small short stories in there, or little vignettes, or whatever you want to call it, but they're all contained in Genesis, and Genesis is very much a setup part of the Bible, right? It's the first book, and then there's a big gap in time between Genesis and Exodus, and then pretty much it's nearly continuous until the end of the Bible from that point on. There is another similar gap in there, but it's not as much but it's more of a gap of just pure time, as opposed to, I mean, that's not 100% true, but it's sort of true. It's more of just a time gap, whereas between Genesis and Exodus, it's more of it is a time gap, but it's also a bit of a sort of world change. It's a different world kind of gap. That's maybe a little bit true, a little bit not necessarily so true. But in terms of the story of the Bible, it really is. In other words, we're in a completely different context. Okay. Anyway, so my point is, this story that you picked is kind of the very beginning of the sort of narrative proper of the Bible, the non-prologue part, or something like that. Maybe the non-introduction part, or setup part, or something like that. Okay. Already extending this video, but it's a really perfect place that you picked, and because it really is as we're going to talk about, it's essentially the calling out. It's the something like the announcement, something like that, of part 3, which is really the part that is the major. It's pretty much the Old Testament, and then Jesus is the New Testament. So. Okay, so I guess just read it first and then talk about it a few minutes. I mean, since we're jumping into the middle here, I'll literally just read it so you're familiar with it. I mean, I think part of your question was just you kind of remembered this thing about a stick turning into a snake, and I don't know that it was much more than that. So we'll just kind of talk read it and see, yep, that's what it is, sort of, and then maybe put it in a little bit of context, maybe expand the context a little, but yeah, and then that'll be that, because I think the way to do this more interestingly, at least, is to actually go back to Genesis instead of Exodus, and walk through the full setup, and then see how this, what brought this into being, like what's beginning here. Although now that I think about it, I might talk about that a little bit. Okay. So let me bring this up on the screen. Okay, so this is Bible Gateway. It is, I'm using the English Standard Version. I think you might have an NIV, New International Version Bible. That's fine. I like 3 versions the best so far of the ones I've read. English Standard Version is very good. I will probably use it most of the time. It might be the case that I'm almost tied between 2, maybe even the 3 that I like, but I absolutely love the English Standard Version Study Bible so much more than the others. So it's not the translation I'm talking about. The translations are probably each, like, I'm very pleased with each of the 3 that I like, which I will mention in a second. But in terms of Study Bible, I think it's hands down, the ESV is so much better. So the other 2 that I like are the NASB, New American Standard Bible, and then the RSV, the Revised Standard Version. Actually, technically, I think I read the RSV 2, the second edition, or second update to the translation. So RSV 2. And then technically, I read the -CE, the Catholic edition. There are a few word changes in the Catholic edition. I think just a very few. But the main difference is that it includes the Apocrypha, what are called the Apocrypha. So, well, what are called the Apocrypha by Protestants. But anyway, it has a number of extra books that the Protestants do not have, but the Catholics do. Good books, very good. So anyway, but the one I'm using here and that I will generally use, I think, is the ESV, English Standard Version, if I did not say that. I really, really, really am impressed with it. Okay, so let's see. The story is the first 5 verses kind of in chapter 4 here, so just read that. Well, wait a minute, maybe I should set it up for a second, because we are in chapter 3, and of course we're in Exodus, not Genesis. So because, so it says, then Moses answered. So, well, what is the then all about? Well, we can go back and look at 3, but we'll do that next time as we progress through, and we will be coming from 3. But basically, Moses has just had his first interaction with God. You may have heard the story of the burning bush. Well, Moses is at the burning bush, and this is his introduction to God. Moses is going to be a great hero in the Bible, and this Exodus is where Moses comes into the Bible. We're in chapter 4 here, so he's been introduced a few chapters ago, but this is the real calling of Moses. The first few chapters are setting things up, and or the first couple of chapters, and then in chapter 3, that's the burning bush. That's where the burning bush is. That's what we're getting to here, or what we're inside here. If we were going to go through sort of an obvious section, we would be reading 3 and 4 together, but we're not even going through all the 4. We're just doing this little section. So, but anyway, so Moses has come across this bush burning in the desert, and he goes to investigate it, and God begins talking to him from the bush. So anyway, that's the basic setup here. And what's happening is, this is the call of Moses. So this is where God begins to use Moses. It's not quite, it maybe has the wrong connotation, but where Moses becomes a true instrument of God, where he begins his his journey, as Jordan Peterson might say, his adventure or whatever, with God as God's instrument to in God's overall plan. Remember, I'm sure I've mentioned this many times, but the overarching story of the Bible is a rescue mission. God is going to restore, or a restoration mission. Maybe that's a little more accurate. It is a little more accurate, I think. And so God has a restoration mission, and this is part 3, the real beginning of that mission. And then part 4 with Jesus is the sort of conclusion of that mission. And so this is where Moses gets called, and it really begins. He's at the burning bush, and he's having a little introduction or a little talk with God. He's asked God who he is. He's introduced himself in previous chapter. And now we're here. Introductions are done, kind of thing. And then Moses answered. But behold, so I'm saying this is where God brings Moses into his plan to restore the world. And what he has told Moses is that I'm sending you to rescue the Hebrews. The Hebrews are slaves at the moment in Egypt. And God has just told Moses that it's going to be his job to go rescue the Hebrews. He's going to send him to Egypt, and the job is to bring the Hebrews out of Egypt. And that's what I think you mentioned the other day. That's the parting of the Red Sea. That's where on the way out, the waters are split, and the Hebrews, that's them, leaving slavery behind, passing through the water. The water split. That's like the boundary, the edge of slavery. On one side is slavery. The other side is God. Or something like that, freedom, you could say, but whatever level you want to analyze it on. So there's this unpassable boundary of water, and on one side is slavery, and on one side is freedom, or on one side is captivity. One side is freedom. However you want to think about it. Essentially, you can think of it as on one side is, in a sense, not God, and the other side is God. That's why on the other side, throughout the Bible, I'm sure you've heard the term the promised land before, or the land of milk and honey. Well, that's what's on the other side of the Red Sea. Slavery on one side, and the promised land, God, the kingdom of heaven, etc., etc., same thing. On the other side, the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, etc. So God told him in the previous chapter 3, that's his job. He's sending him to Egypt to bring the Hebrews out. And Moses is, as we'll see in some of this, Moses is not looking forward to this. He's scared. He's not up to it. He's not ready, he thinks. And so God just told him what he's going to do. And then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me," the Hebrews, the people he's going to talk to. "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' The Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' He said, 'A staff.' And he said, the Lord said, 'Throw it on the ground.' So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it." That's important. "But the Lord said to Moses, 'Put out your hand and catch it by the tail.' So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Okay, so really that's the story. Now, there's more, obviously, in this paragraph, but and I'll read that here in a minute, but that's the first thing to talk about. So Moses is saying, God just told him to go to the Hebrews, talk to them, collect them, gather them together, and lead them out. Of course, they have a slave master that's not going to, the Pharaoh, who's not going to just allow that. But in any case, the overall plan is to go gather the Hebrews together and get them to follow Moses and lead them out. And so Moses says, "But why would they believe me? He's just they don't know him really, or they don't, when we get to the other part of the story, you'll see why they don't really know who he is. I mean, maybe indirectly, but they don't really know him. Why would they trust me, etc.? And so then God responds, okay, well, God's going to give him this. You might think of it as magic. Now, it's going to be referred to as a miracle, but there is a similar event that takes place that is referred to as magic. At least I'm pretty sure that's the word they use. And we'll look briefly at that in a few minutes in chapter 7. So there are two stories that are similar to this, where a staff turns into a snake, and you can kind of think of this one as a foreshadowing, or they're kind of as a foreshadowing. They serve two different but related purposes, and therefore they're connected. Anyway, so that happens a lot in the Bible, constantly, an event, and then the event sort of recurs. In fact, many events recur multiple times, but in different contexts. And so, it's like it's often a kind of expanding of the event. It's the same event, but on a bigger and bigger scale, or a deeper and deeper or more important scale, or something like that. So Moses is afraid, why would they're not going to believe me. Who am I? And God gives him this miracle to perform as a way to dazzle them, and to convince them that he has spoken with, or God has spoken with him, because he now has this power that obviously is beyond human, so presumably from God. Okay, so God is in control of this scenario. Moses is still not the instrument that God needs, right? He still has some progress to make. And so God tells him, throw it on the ground. He threw it on the ground, and it becomes a serpent. And then Moses runs from it. Moses ran from it. Clearly, once again, indicating Moses is not ready. Quite. Of course, this scene is what makes Moses ready. By the time I will read the second paragraph, and then that'll be the end of it. I won't try to include the whole, but I won't go more than that. I think that's enough to wrap up the sort of a certain level of meaning of this story. If we read all the first two paragraphs of chapter 4, but still, at this point, Moses is not ready because he runs from the snake, right? So he throws. In other words, this is all. He's talking to God. God is controlling this scenario, and yet Moses is still living, not quite emotional. He's living emotionally or something like that. He's still immature. Although not for much longer, sort of. So he runs from the snake, but God interrupts him and says, okay, pick it up by the tail. And so he does pick it up, and it turns back into his staff. And then the rest of this section that we read is just that. Well, there you go. There's a miracle that you can now perform in front of the Israelites in order to convince them that you have been gifted power by God, and therefore you are from God. You have been sent from God. You are a messenger of God, a prophet of God, as it will turn out. And so then they should, at least in theory, that may convince them to follow you as a messenger of God, a prophet of God. So really, we could end this story right there. I mean, we could end this right here, I guess. That's the simple, I guess, kind of the simplest thing that's going on in here. That's what was happening when the staff turned into a snake. God was giving Moses a miracle, the ability, the access to a miracle in order to convince the Hebrews to follow him. We can go a little bit further than that, though, I will. There's interesting symbolism here. I won't get too much into that, but now, I mean, we'll go into it maybe more. But I do, when I'm going through this narrative, maybe want to try to stay mostly on the narrative level instead of getting too deep in sort of symbolism and philosophy and so on. But on subsequent readings through the Bible, you definitely, I mean, there's so much beauty in the connections that are being made. And you could come up with a ton of them here, because the Bible was written over such a vast stretch of time that, you know, well, there are just so many connections. Like you can, every verse it seems like is connected forward and backward. It's just quite something, forward and backward in the Bible. An obvious quick thing that pops to mind when you think of the staff and a snake. Just think of a piece of wood, an upright piece of wood, a staff, something you use for support, for protection, for, you know, it's an important when you're alone in a desert as here, or when you're alone anywhere, but it's a standard piece of security, of stability, of safety, of, you know, it's something you can use as a weapon, it's something you can use as a tool. It provides, I mean, just like was reading something somewhere, and I can't, it wasn't about this, I don't think. Oh no, it wasn't about this at all. But actually, maybe I'll say it just because it's kind of a funny story. I was watching someone discussing a music video, and this is really goofy, but or off track sort of, but it's actually perfectly relevant to this. So they were discussing a movie video, and it was sort of an '80s rock video, and they noticed that singers then, and I'm sure they do now, but they would often take the speaker, the mic, not the speaker, the mic stand along with them while they're singing, you know, so they're dancing around or whatever they're doing, you know, and they're carrying the stand with them, rather than just carrying the mic. And the question came up, you know, why are they doing this? This is kind of odd. I mean, I never stopped to think about it because it's just what I always saw, but that person is from a different, not from rock and roll, and so they asked that question, you know, why are they carrying the stand around? It looks kind of cumbersome, and it does periodically, but anyway, it doesn't at other times, but sometimes it does. So anyway, it popped into their head, why are you carrying the stand? And one of the responses was, there were a lot, and there are reasons you can think of, and some good interesting suggestions and so on. But one of the reasons was something like, you know, he's carrying, I mean, I'll use this terminology, but he's carrying a staff around. And for anybody that's ever carried a staff or a walking stick or something, I'm slightly adjusting the context, but, well, I am adjusting the context, but for anybody that's ever carried one, you automatically know the difference between carrying one and not carrying one, you know, and it's just, so anyway, okay, that the connection in my mind was, it is important, but I'm not sure that is going to come across in that I didn't say that very well, maybe, but it's exactly what I'm talking about here. When a staff is just, I mean, it's a symbol of authority, of kingship. You know, a king will have a staff or a rod, some version of that. You know, it's just, you can feel when you have it and when you don't, you know. And but anyway, so there are lots of things you could connect with the importance of a staff: the security, the stability, the firmness, the whatever, the safety, the all kinds of things of a staff. So and then, but if you just quickly think of the Bible in terms of something like a staff, or what obviously that is it was a tree, it is a tree. If you think in terms of symbolism, very often something like a staff, you just can automatically think tree. Well, tree and snake, that instantly takes you back to Genesis, the original, one of the original stories in the Bible, with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the snake, or the tree of life. Really, in the end, the most important things there sort of are the tree of life in the garden and then the snake in the garden. Those are kind of two opposites, and that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a tree and the snake, but sort of in Genesis, okay, I'm not going to go into this any deeper than this, but in Genesis, those two things sort of, there's a separation that takes place in Genesis, and that's the whole restoration mission of the Bible, to restore that separation, and it's very much related with the opposites of the tree of life and the snake, the serpent. And here you can think almost of something, those two things in one. And, it totally makes sense. You can think of it as order and chaos. A staff, a tree is a standard symbol or should instantly relate to you in many cases. The idea of connection, of joining between heaven and earth, because that's what trees and mountains do, right? They're both in the ground and in heaven, right? They're both down and up. So that's heaven and earth, God and man, the highest and the lowest. It's connection. It's the joining point. Stairs can be this sometimes. Ladder, but those are sort of man created things, right? The natural versions of that connection between heaven and earth are in all cultures, kind of trees and mountains. And so this solid tree reaching from heaven to earth, this staff reaching upward to heaven and earth, right? Often you can think in terms of upward connections and horizontal connections. In biblical terms, it'll end up thinking like something like the connection between heaven and earth, man and God, versus connections among men or between men and creation and so on. So, horizontal relationships, vertical relationships. Well, obviously a tree is a vertical relationship with that which is lower to that which is higher. And then when he throws it down, it becomes a horizontal connection. But not just a horizontal connection. The interesting thing, or an interesting thing with the snake, besides its obvious inherent psychological, the inherent psychological fear that a snake invokes in pretty much all animals. There's a few that hunt snakes, but even then, I'm sure there's some. Anyway, there's a deep-seated psychological reaction to a snake. But you can think of that in all kinds of levels. So there's that element, right? This element of safety, when vertical, becoming an element in becoming sort of like a snake is one of the fundamental things that dangers that humans react to, or even as babies. You just instantly can react to that. And so the vertical safety, the horizontal danger, you can also think of the vertical straightness and stability and so on. The horizontal, so that's something like order. The horizontal chaos. Now, the reason it's chaos, though, is because a snake is wavy, right? It doesn't have, it's completely it doesn't have sort of a shape, right? It changes its shape. That's the sort of idea of chaos, right? A straight, solid rod, staff is ordered, it's structured, it's firm, it's fixed, it's predictable, all those types of things. Order. A snake is the opposite of order. That's why it often is the representation of chaos, of order, etc. A serpent, sea dragons, etc. Those things are the standard symbols for chaos, for disorder, for disunity, for danger, and chaos is the kind of standard way of thinking of it, or a standard way of thinking of it. But what God is giving Moses the power to do here is merge those, of turn, because then God then says, okay, so Moses sees the danger. He sort of releases this staff onto the ground. It becomes horizontal, right? So the upward becomes the order into chaos. But God gives him a power over that. God gives him a power over chaos to restore it to order. Well, that's the entire story of the Bible, to restore chaos that has occurred after what gets shown in Genesis, what gets set up. This is the beginning of the Bible. This is a beautiful example. This is a beautiful foreshadowing of the entire point of everything from Exodus on. Genesis is about, in the very beginning, God creates order, but then the entire rest of Genesis is about it descending into chaos. And descending into chaos, and then the subsequent, sort of setup of the Moses story. But it's the chaotic world, and then God begins his plan. But anyway, we'll get to that. But But this is the part 3, the sort of continuous plan of God to restore that chaos back into order. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. The danger, the chaos, etc. Moses grabs the chaos. He is given authority over it, and he restores the chaos to order. So the slithering, unshapen, chaotic, horizontal, when it becomes a staff in his hand, you imagine, the symbolism here is to imagine it back, work as a staff works generally, upright, joining heaven and earth with firmness, with structure, etc., with rigidity, with predictableness, so chaos to order. And Moses does it. He does it. So he runs from this at first, right? He sees the chaos, he sees the danger, and he is not ready for it. He's afraid of it. So he runs from it. But God interrupts him, and God tells him, take it, restore it, and he does. So this is the first step. So things are progressing here. But just on a narrative level, it's very simple. I did go on longer than I intended to there, but you can read everything like this. It's so amazing. I'll try not to too much because I find it fascinating. That's why I just went on and on and on. And we haven't even touched it yet because there's all kinds of other symbolism in here that's connected to other things, including the fact that another version of this occurs in 3 more chapters. But once we know the entire story of the Bible and have everything leading up to it, and then once you know the entire story all the way to the end, it takes on even far more meaning because the snake thing comes up several more times, including in part 4 with Jesus. The connections with snakes and everything. The Bible began with a snake, in the Garden of Eden, and there are snakes throughout, and there's these constant connections. Because, as I said, it's not just when you read the Bible through, you can, if it's your first time, for instance, you might, probably not, but you might catch some of these connections to what you've read so far. But until you've read the Bible all the way to the end and then they're sort of coming back, you won't necessarily, you wouldn't realize that there aren't just connections forward. There aren't just connections backward. There are connections forward. So it's just staggeringly beautiful book, just filled with the whole purpose is to reveal the whole point of the Bible is to reveal everything, your purpose, how you fit. It's to reveal reality. In particular, it's God's revelation of himself. And again, I know I haven't talked about that word a whole lot, necessarily what I mean by God, so it can sound different than what I really mean by it. I'm sure it does to almost everyone, but the whole Bible is really the revelation of God himself, his own character, through the story, right? We learn about God through the story that God is in control of, right? Because your actions or something like that demonstrate who you are, and that's what the Bible is. It's God's revelation of himself through the story of reality, through the entire story of creation and everything, and within that it tells us how reality functions. It tells us how we function, our purpose, our place in reality, etc. That's the whole point of the Bible, to essentially reveal to us how to live, how to prosper, how to thrive, how to be who we were created to be, etc. That's the whole point. But it's told in this beautiful story that you can read as a story and just keep going deeper and deeper. Okay, so however deep you want to go. So okay, so I guess we could stop there, but I'll go ahead because the next parts are similar to what we just talked about. The next couple of sentences, so we'll just go through them very quickly. So that was the end of verse 5. So God gives him this access to perform a miracle to demonstrate his connection, his being sent by God. And then verse 6. Again, the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous, like snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, the miracle with the staff, then they may believe the latter sign, the healing, the leper's hand, and then the healing of the hand. If they will not believe even these two signs, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So that's the first. That is the first 9 chapters of Exodus chapter 4. 9 verses of Exodus chapter 4. I am hyper. The first paragraph, sort of. I mean, the Bible was not originally written with these verses or paragraphs. That's relatively modern, but so God has given him 2 more miracles to perform here, in order. So 3 miracles, pretty classic. 3 is a good round. Once is once. Twice is maybe a coincidence. 3 times is okay. Now you got to start paying attention. So 3 is pretty standard. It's pretty easy to just sort of feel. I mean, don't try to make too much sense of it. It just feels like, you do something to impress someone once. Okay, that's pretty neat. You do it a second time. Oh, okay, that's it. But there's a third time, like you can't ignore it anymore, right? Something like that. Just feel that idea. I mean, that you can think of it that way, something like that. And it's also sort of covering. It's sort of covering different aspects of reality. So the first is this sort of creation. I mean, it's kind of the beginning, sort of creation, the order and the chaos. So it's sort of elemental in nature, right? It's kind of, it depends on how you look at it. You can think of it as danger. You can think of it as physical danger with the snake. If we go back to a simple level, let's not shouldn't start too symbolic. But if you just look at a simple level, it's sort of physical danger, and the control over that, right? The turning the physical danger into safety, literally a snake, physical danger into security, a staff that actually would protect you from the snake. So it's the power over those and the connection between them and so on. So the first is a demonstration of authority, of power, control over physical danger. You could think of it that way. The second is over health, sort of not the physical danger as much as the danger of disease, pestilence, that kind of the health issue. So it's control over that. The leprosy not meaning, by the way, in the Bible, leprosy does not mean what we think of as leprosy. It essentially means a skin problem. Depending upon the context, it means it to very varying degrees of seriousness, but something wrong with the skin. It may be very serious, but it's something wrong with the skin. It's more of a general term than the way we use it for a very specific disease. And then in the end, something like power over life and death, right? Water and blood are very just pregnant with symbolism and sort of just meaning for humans. Again, don't think too logically about it. Just understand it. Just think. Water is life. Blood spilled on the ground is death, right? So this is very symbolic, right? This involves an element of. It's an implication of the power over life and death, something like that. Blood on the ground, that obviously is some sort of connection to death. And in fact, later in the plagues in Egypt, something like this will come about with the Nile River. The Nile River, it takes on even more importance later in the story because the Nile River is just like it is Egypt, water, and in particular the Nile River. And so Moses is working here with, in other words, it is the lifeblood of Egypt. without the Nile, when the Nile would fail, when the floods, the annual floods would fail, it was catastrophic because they do not get rain in Egypt. So Nile was, I mean, it's the same as not raining in other places, but anyway, so this will come in later because there are some miracles that are some plagues that involve the Nile. But fundamentally, you don't even need that. It's just water is life and blood is death. At least not blood. Blood is also life, right? The life is in the blood, which is said multiple times in the Bible. So the life is in the blood, but this is blood on the ground, blood spilled on the ground, which is death. This is blood not where it's supposed to be. It's blood on the ground. So you have these different, this sort of complete authority over physical dangers, over internal dangers of health and so on, and then the ultimate authority over life and death, something like that. So he gives them these three miracles to impress the Hebrews so that he can perform, so that he can be who he is supposed to be in this overarching plan of God to restore creation to himself. That's the overall theme of the Bible, or story of the Bible. And so Moses is now prepared, sort of. We'll continue. There's still more. Moses is not yet prepared. I mean, God's given him. Notice. So God has just done these three miracles, and he's literally talking to God. He's at a burning bush talking to God, and yet Moses is still not quite ready. So you can see that this same story is told over and over because the Hebrews go through a similar thing where they're kind of there, but they're not. They still don't obey, right? They see all these amazing things like Moses just saw and is seeing. He's in front of the burning bush talking to God, but he's still not quite ready, right? The whole Bible is this sort of the difficulty of us trusting, having faith, although don't think of that as just a belief that you have with no reason. That's not, it's more like faithfulness, trust. It's more like when we say we have faith in someone, meaning we believe in them, we have trust in them, it's more like that. And so the whole Bible is this story told over and over again, but the great heroes of the Bible develop this faith in God, this trust in God. But Moses still doesn't have it, as we'll see in the next verse. Even though he's just seen all these miracles, not only seen them, but taken part in them, having given the power to perform them. The Hebrews will do something similar, and then on and on and on and on and on and on and on throughout the Bible. As an example of actual reality, that's why the Bible is so brilliant. It's not, or part of why it's not a story of just these perfect people. It's exactly like what we would be. Okay, yeah, so God is giving him this authority, this power to use in order to complete his purpose. But Moses said, verse 10, but Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." So Moses is now coming up with another excuse, I'm not a good speaker. But it's deeper than that. It's, I'm not ready. But anyway, this is the excuse. I don't know what to say. I don't speak well. Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs." Okay, I probably should have stopped about halfway through there when Moses, God reassures him. He just gave him the miracles, and now he reassures him. Moses protests. I'm not capable of this. I'm not a good speaker. They're still not going to follow me. And God says, I'm God. I made you. I made your mouth. I control all that. I'm with you. Don't worry about it. And I'll teach you I'll teach you what you shall speak. And he says, and Moses still says, please don't send me. This is the same story. Jonah and the whale. I'm sure you have some familiarity with that story. That's the same story. The story with Abraham is similar. Anyway, the same story of God calling someone and them not being ready, or maybe not believing they're ready, which I guess is not ready, but God bringing them to it, right? God bringing them along. The whole story of the Bible is God bringing us from where we are to him. It's not a story that's in other words, it's a real story. It deals with where we actually are, which is why it's so recognizable when you take the time to actually read it. It's not a story of these heroes that we could never be or nothing like us and so on. Not exactly. I mean, these people become amazing, but they don't start that way. It's God, the entire Bible is God taking people from where they are, not from they're just this amazing person that was born perfect, way beyond any of us. It's nothing like that. Taking people from where they are, which is us, because it's talking to us, and bringing us to God. Please send someone else, and then God starts to get mad, right? He's gone through this He's kept giving Moses, kept trying to impress Moses in the way that Moses, or in a similar way that Moses is supposed to go impress the Israelites and get them to follow him. Well, that is happening right now with Moses himself. I don't know if I just said that right. Did I say to impress? He's sending Moses to go impress the Hebrews with this power to bring them out. But so far, it's not even working on Moses. God's performing these same miracles and saying these same things even more directly than the people will get it, because Moses is going to be the intermediary between God and them. This is how difficult it is to follow God in some ways. Now, of course, as the Bible will talk about and show, and when you understand it, there's a I don't want to say a reward for that. It is, but it's not, you don't do it for the reward quite, although you can, and at least that works. But talk more about that later. But it's a difficult path. It's a narrow road. This is also said in the Bible. This path is a narrow one. There are lots of paths away from God. The path to God is a narrow one, and this is just demonstrating that. Moses is even having a hard time here, even literally talking directly to God and being given these powers, or access to this power, the access to miracles, the authority to perform miracles, and he's still not trusting and not ready to jump and follow God and so on. So God starts to get angry with him. Again, another thing we'll talk about at some point. Read it as anger in the story, that's fine. Totally personify God. That's how it's told, and it's a beautiful way to read it. Now, you can't get stuck in that mode forever, and unfortunately, it should be read probably when you're younger and you don't start to question that, I don't want to know about a God who gets angry, right? So unfortunately for most people, when they're reading something like this and then they hear the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, right? That may turn them off, this angry and wrathful God. Well, it's told that way for early when you're reading it, but as you start to try to get more philosophical about it, which is what that view is, in my philosophy, God shouldn't be angry or whatever, right? In order to make that claim, you're already bringing in some philosophical presuppositions, some ideas that are claiming this is not a good thing. So anyway, my point is, later we will learn how to read that, how to understand that in a way that makes sense of something like a good and perfect God getting angry and so on. It does make perfect sense, but you have to later we'll introduce higher levels. So this is an introductory, a narrative version, so that you can understand the story. And so it's being told to humans, again, as we are. in a way that we can understand, because we can understand that. Now, we then may make some philosophical claims about whether God should get angry or not, but don't go to that level. Just, this is the story. God is calling Moses to do something good, and Moses is fighting it, and finally God puts his foot down. Think of it as a parent and a child or something. In other words, that's exactly the way to think of it, or a way to think of it. This is an anger of a parent to their child, but it's an anger of love, something like that, or it's not destructive anger. It means something different than that. It means it in the way that you would discipline your child, and that can hurt or whatever, but that's out of love. There's a complete difference. So it's not just more like that. It is that, but there are even higher ways to think about it, as there are with a parent and child. So then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he says, but God kind of relents. Okay, Moses is not perfect. God adjusts the plan, so to speak. God adjusts the plan. Moses has a brother, Aaron. We're introduced to him here, and that he exists. And Moses is going to be the speaker. Aaron is going to be the speaker for Moses, his brother. So, new plan. All of this will factor into the story overall. Moses is going to be the leader, something like the prophet or the king. Aaron is going to end up being the priest side, right? In fact, we mentioned this, came up in a conversation the other day. You kind of have three leading type divisions of leader, or three divisions of leadership, kind of. You have a king, the political realm, the military realm, kind of something like that. You have a king, you have a priest, which is still within that structured realm, right? The king and the priest, but it's a different area, right? The priest deals with the you could say religious, but with the spiritual, the priest deals with the vertical relationship, is the mediator between heaven and earth, between God and the people. The king deals somewhat more with the horizontal relationship. They work together and so on, but the king deals more with the horizontal, right? The king is between the people and the foreigners, something like that, or even between the people and the people. He dispenses justice both internally among the people and externally among other nations. He keeps them safe, etc. So the king deals with the worldly things. The priest deals with the spiritual things, so vertical and horizontal. And then you have the third category of leadership that is a prophet. He's outside of there. So kings and priests, right? They're part of the standard hierarchy. They deal with the society in a standard sort of structured hierarchical or way. They have sort of, it isn't quite totally accurate here, but sort of fixed roles within society. Prophets are people who come along. It's a different group of leadership. There are people who come along who stand very much outside of that structure, and they are there to explicitly, too often, criticize that structure, right? They are there to recognize the flaws that are developing in that, the corruption that is developing in that structure, and so they have to be outsiders. So prophets are a third group, and they come in to prophesy, which is not to tell the future. That's not they come in to not to tell the future in like, I predict in 5 years that this will happen. It's not that. It's to recognize breakdowns, injustice, corruption, the lack of proper performance of the duties of the kings and the priests and so on. So they come in largely as critics, because of exactly that. They're there to, but it can also be to uplift, so the people need a message. Prophets are the messengers of God, right? So priests and kings sort of work in a structured way with God. When they're doing it right, when they're exercising justice and righteousness and so on, they do it properly, so it's in line with God. But a prophet is a messenger of God, something like that. And so when needed, right? So prophets rise up and and take care of a situation, and then they may fade into the background for a while, and another prophet will rise up when the need is there. God sends prophets to make corrections, to uplift, to encourage, or to criticize and condemn. You got to change this. To warn, etc. So you have these three categories. Moses will be, until this structure sort of begins to coalesce later, way later in the story. In the interim, Moses is going to be something like both prophet and king, right? He's the prophet, he's the messenger of God. That's what's happening here. He's going to the people to say that he just spoke with God. I mean, he's literally the prophet. And then on the journey to the promised land, though, he's also going to he's going to perform the role of king. Moses is best thought of and talked about as a prophet, but but in that structure, that model that I talked about with the sort of three-part model, he's also performs the duties of a king until an actual king later, significantly later, comes about. And then those roles are kind of separated. But anyway, so Aaron is going to play a fundamental part in the story. From him, the priests will descend, and from Moses, the prophets will sort of all kind of be like Moses. In fact, the fundamental, critical, an important verse in these beginning books of the Bible is that there will one day arise another prophet, a prophet greater than Moses, and that will be Jesus. That's part 4, right? Part 3 begins with the prophet Moses. Part 4 begins with the prophet Jesus. Okay, so I'm not sure how I got into that, except probably just talking about how Moses is even having trouble here. But the anger of God was kindled against Moses, and he gives this, he shifts the plan and gives this alternative way to accomplish his purpose, God's purpose. And so he says, you shall speak him, and he shall be. And another interesting thing here. I mean, this just interesting that it's said this way. It's not. I think this is the only place in the Bible anything like this is said. Really, he shall. So verse 16 there, the second sentence from the end. He shall speak for you. Aaron shall speak for Moses to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. So anyway, this is sort of. I mean, very interesting to even say that, to even suggest it. It's kind of rare or it's totally rare in the Bible to even suggest something like that. You shall be as God to him. It doesn't say you will be God, but you shall be as God to him. To even make that connection just almost feels, it does feel odd in the Bible, but it's also demonstrating the importance of Moses, that a line like that would even dare occur in the Bible. But it's also setting up this hierarchy, this hierarchy of connection of God, and then there will be these intermediaries between God and the people, and so on. So it's setting that up. You've already now got this line, God, or this hierarchy: God, Moses, Aaron, the people. So we're getting this structure, and the structure will continue to develop. Take in your hand the staff with which you shall do the signs. So take the order, take the power, take the authority, etc., and go out and do this. And then, so then we start another section where there's a bit of a sort of interlude again. Some interesting couple of little stories and vignettes in here. But of course now it's going to lead its way back into Egypt, and then there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that takes place there. But that's the story of the staff into the serpent. It's a very simple story. It's just Moses is going to be God's instrument in restoring creation, and this step of that is to, it's a long process. It takes thousands of years, many thousands of years, and the step from here on, I mean, there were steps earlier, but at this point, the next step is to go get the Hebrews and bring them out to the promised land, bring them out of slavery into the promised land. And then there are more steps and more steps and more steps for thousands of years. Okay, so I'll just briefly point at the other reference to this thing, and then we'll wrap this one up. How long have I gone on here? Over an hour. Okay, so that was Exodus chapter 4, Exodus chapter 7. So I think again in this first chapter, first paragraph, second paragraph. Yeah, okay, so the second paragraph here, it's on the screen here, so I can look at it here, but the actual control of that web browser is over here. That's why I was looking over here. Okay, so starting there in verse 8, the second paragraph, let me scroll it down a little bit. So starting there in verse 8, then the Lord's, so now they are, a couple of things have happened, but God is still telling him what's going to happen. So, as I mentioned, God is sending Moses into Egypt to bring the Hebrews out, but they are slaves. So Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is not just going to let that happen, right? He's going to fight it. So this is going to be the third example of this need to impress, right? So the first one is God impressing Moses with these miracles to make Moses into the man he needs to be, or to get Moses to choose to be, to decide to be the man he's created to be. And then he's giving Moses the power to go impress the Hebrews so that they can come out and become the nation they were created to be, God's chosen people. And these miracles are also going to be used to impress Pharaoh, to allow the Hebrews to come out to be the nation, to be God's chosen people. So all of these are, this whole situation here with the serpent at this point is being used to demonstrate God's authority and his ability, and to demonstrate God's authority through his chosen servants. So God, since Moses can do this, and obviously it's a miracle, which means humans can't normally do this, that's the demonstration of God's power, and the demonstration of Moses and Aaron as the instruments of God, the servants of God. So verse 8, then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. So that's the miracle. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. The Lord told him, you're going to have to do a lot of stuff. Pharaoh's not going to listen, but this is the first step. So anyway, I won't really go into this, I guess, but that's where this miracle comes back into play. It actually, I'm trying to think of what miracles he has to perform for the Hebrews. Actually, I should have read that. I didn't. I jumped to here. But in any case, he does perform this miracle for Pharaoh, and it gets extended a little bit, right? Because so this is where, let's see, the magicians also did the same by their secret arts. So I said earlier, it's called magic when they do it. It's called a miracle when God is doing it. It's called magic when they do it. Although technically, I guess in this translation anyway, maybe all of them, it doesn't say that. It says magicians, the wise men and the sorcerers and the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So they also have, like, the Bible doesn't. The Bible fully is not like it doesn't deny there are these powers within the world, and that's what's being discussed here, that can do things like that. I mean, that's exactly what this is saying. So the Bible never denies that there are these powers, these control over nature and so on, and that can be used for not God's purposes, but that's what's happening here. That in the end, those are corruptions of power, and God's power is always stronger. And the entire story of the Bible is that God's power will always win out in the end. Win is not even quite the right word. It's just that there is no alternative, right? Everything leads to God. God is all. We're getting much more. We'll get to that in other parts of the story. But on a basic level here, they could do magic, but to demonstrate God's authority over even their magic, right? That makes it, that enhances the power of God, right? Because it's not just that Moses has this sort of control over order and chaos, or however you want to think of it, danger, has this ability to perform this miracle. They can do the miracle too, but then God says, okay, and the symbolism is obvious, but then notice it says, it's interesting, I hadn't thought a whole lot about this, but I heard somebody point it out. It doesn't say Moses' serpent or whatever ate the others. It says, for each man cast down a staff. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs, right? Now, in viewing it, the snake swallowed the snake, but the snake is not the connection to God, right? It's essentially, the staff is the connection to God, is the order, is the good part, and it's so God conquered the false gods is what's going on here, or God is stronger than the false gods. The false gods are nothing, right? The staff swallowed their staffs. Essentially, you can think of it as that the true God defeats the false gods, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so the Bible shouldn't take too long. 5 verses, hour and 12 minutes. Pretty good. We did more than 5, but anyway. Okay. I think that was probably more. It was certainly more than I intended. Probably more than you intended, and maybe in I don't know, maybe a negative way, because I on some level we talked about discussing it simply, and I think I did actually. There's much deeper you can go, but probably obviously still went a lot on this, but I don't know. It was interesting to me. I actually saying it this is the first time I've ever talked about it, so saying it that way, I clarified a few things. I think I will bring this story up again in the future for various reasons, and when I read it, I will definitely read it very differently now. So I would enjoy doing this. I hope it does work out, and I think I'm going to start from the beginning and not try to cover every single thing. Just in the moment, the things that strike me. Read a chapter, a few verses, a half a chapter, whatever. Talk about it and kind of just move on when it's ready. If it's a few minutes, good. If it's an hour, good. Move on to the next one. Just make your way through. And always keeping in mind, though, the overarching story. When I start this, I'll occasionally bring back remember the entire story here is the descent into, the Bible begins with the descent into something like corruption or chaos, and then the entire rest of the Bible is how all that gets restored. That is the entire Bible. And as part of that, it's how it teaches us how to play our part in that restoration, which is what we are designed to do, which is our purpose, etc. People ask, what's the meaning of life or something? Well, it's all right there. It's all right there. You will find it there. So, okay. Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to whatever that was. All right. Good night, beautiful.